Hey everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining me on this discussion today. There's something that I've been thinking about even before I had this conversation with our guest, Hayden Brown, today. The big idea is that the way that we think, talk, and make decisions affects the world around us. So in other words, what we're going through in our own little worlds can actually have a broader impact on the world around us. And that's true no matter how far you zoom in or you zoom out. My theory is, and this is backed up, I guess, with a lot of conversations that I've had with successful people, some people seem to be able to convert opportunity into great outcomes better than others. And my suspicion is it's because their minds were already running in the right gear before the opportunity showed up. So am I suggesting, though, that to be really rich, you have to be really smart? No, I'm not. But we do have to think about what we're thinking about every now and then to actually get a good chance that we might get that wealth going on. So today, if you're brave enough to join me, I'm exploring the idea that true riches are buried a little bit deeper in our minds, in our motivations behind our actions. So imagine this. It's 15, 20 years ahead into the future from now, and you're retired. You're retired from working because you have to. And if you do work, you do it because you really want to. You have more than enough, so you don't actually need the money. You're mortgage free. Maybe you're still living in the family home and you say goodbye to the kids and it's still fine. Or maybe you've sold up, you've moved to a holiday home destination, you're living in the country palace, whatever it is. Maybe you get to choose where you live, and it's even better than that. The kids have the right partners, they have good jobs, you've done your job really well, you're healthy, you're happy. In essence, you've arrived at that good place that you've quietly always wanted and that you've been aiming for. Some of us will find it more challenging than others, just achieving a fraction of that reality or that life. Most of us want some version of this, and yes, some will want even better than that, but wanting on its own doesn't work. Seeing something and deciding you want it, that's a great start, but building wealth requires sustained actions over decades. Actions that need to keep running through all the different life cycle stages of starting out, raising a family, coming in for a landing, and living the good life when you retire. Actions that need to keep running when things go your way and when things don't go your way. Actions that often help others before it helps yourself. I've seen all sorts of different drivers for wealth. Some of us are running away from poverty or even just this perception that poverty can close in on us in a second. Some of us are powered by greed. We want more and we want to build just because we can. It's like a game and we want more and more and more. Some of us are comfort seekers, and whatever it takes to get to a place of comfort and security, we're going to do it. And some of us are fulfilling what we believe is our purpose. It's a higher calling and it's a mission. It's the reason why we've been put here on earth. Some dance to remember, some dance to forget. The reasons why we think what we do and therefore get the life that we do can be a bit of a mystery. Like, where does all that stuff come from and why me and why them and not me? But the reality is that our headspace does affect our world. So it's nothing new. Author James Allen once wrote, "The mind is the master weaver, both of the inner garment of character and the outer garment of circumstance." Now, I know it kind of sounds like a Grateful Dead lyric, but what you're saying here to yourself on the inside eventually leaks out and it changes the outside. So if you're brave enough to join me in this little journey of introspection into the mind with my guest today, with the view to apply something into your own world, I think you'll be better off, literally, for it. So welcome to the show today. Today, I'm joined with Hayden Brown. He's a human behavioral specialist who works with people from all walks of life, helping them to heal and helping them get the edge in some area of performance. Personally, I believe that if there's a renewal of our mind, we can make our own worlds a little bit better and in aggregate the planet too. So I'm keen to understand better how an everyday investor can at the very least rewire their own thinking, their own thoughts to get a better return. Whether you're just starting out learning about money and learning about how to handle it better and learning how to invest, or you're stuck between choosing two amazing opportunities that most of us would kill for, our reasons for investing might shift over time from prepping to doing. expanding, then contracting, accumulation to decumulation. Sometimes you invest to get away from something, and sometimes you invest just because you can. Today, I'd encourage you just to take an audit of yourself in some of these areas. Consider what you define money as, your approach to managing it, and the quality of your decisions with it. I had 2 sessions with Hayden, and I'll be sharing the second one in a couple weeks because next week there's a special announcement. Until then, I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the latest edition of the NZ Everyday Investor podcast. In this podcast, I cover a wide range of topics ranging from property investment, investing in managed funds and KiwiSaver, precious metals and digital assets like Bitcoin. Why do I do it? Because I love learning and helping everyday Kiwis build new wealth for the new world that we're heading into. I'm Darcy Ungaro, your host and qualified financial advisor. My goal is to get self-directed DIY investors thinking about all the tools available to build wealth. While I hope this will assist you in making more informed financial decisions, please do keep in mind that nothing you hear today is considered financial advice. Investments or strategies discussed may not be suitable for everyone, so be sure to do your own research before acting on anything discussed today. Further information on today's show can be found by tapping or swiping over the cover art in your podcast player. Here you'll find some show notes, which will contain all relevant links relating to today's topic. Hope you enjoy the show. Hey, welcome everybody to the Everyday Investor. My name is Darcy Ungaro and I'm with Hayden Brown. Hayden, you are a human behavior specialist. Do you want to break down what that means for our audience?
Yeah, sure, Darcy. So thanks for having me on. So look, what I do is I help people be really clear and essentially unravel the limiting beliefs, the challenges that are perhaps in the way of what's most important to them, whether that's their family, relationships, and obviously as it relates to wealth building, investing equally.
So I guess that could be applied to how people conduct themselves in the workplace. It could be in a relationship setting. It could be, hey, I noticed that some of my behaviors are actually quite damaging to other people and myself. Where does that come from? How do I deal with it? So the methodology that you use, is it more or less the same sort of methodology that you use with all clients, but the settings are different?
Sure. So look, there's a number of principles that I apply with all clients, to your point. But I guess perhaps where I'll start for your audience is almost a bit of a quick intro. Who is this guy and how perhaps is that relevant to them? So I guess, like many of us, our own journey, our own story is influenced by our own pain points and our own challenges. And so, for me growing up, I had a lot of challenges around my own self-worth, my own health. Why do I do the things that I do? Why am I having the certain patterns that, repeating in my life? And, I obviously won't bore you with the extended version of that story, but, the short version of that is I ended up founding a gym or a health and fitness center. And, that was very productive and very meaningful to me at the time. Obviously, much of my values and purpose was around that in a different lifetime. However, one of the things that became really apparent to me over the 9 years that I was running this business would be, those who say something's important to them, those who say they want to lose weight, they want to get healthy, versus, those who actually do it. A really common example would be, a woman comes in and perhaps she's got a wedding coming up and she's really motivated and has that real intrinsic drive to, look her best for her wedding day, for example, or perhaps a business person who, is very aware that their weight perhaps is affecting their confidence or, their ability to put themselves out there romantically and even often professionally, right? And just over time, I would be going in there and I would be thinking, great, I'm writing them this fantastic nutrition plan. It's all structured. This is going to help them achieve their goals. But actually, for many people, again, they would say one thing and do another. And so for me, that was where this interest really grew. Like I said, I had always had a number of challenges, questions. I think we all have trauma and baggage that we're trying to work out. But the real distinction for me going on this journey and what's led me to what I do now with my particular work, which I'll obviously get into, was really seeing that discrepancy between people who say they want something versus what they do. And then, of course, those who perhaps would take action on it, but whether it's they go out on the weekend drinking or they have a fight with their partner and then they go and emotionally eat. I'm sure you and all the audience can relate to this. We all have these patterns that very much repeat in our life. And, for me, wanting the best for my clients, it was just so pivotal that I understood that. And so, fast forward, 5-6 years, what I do with clients now is, as I was saying, I help them what I call uncover the why, address the root cause behind their challenges. As you sort of alluded to, for many clients, that looks like, perhaps relationship challenges, low self-worth mood. But in many cases, I also work a lot with investors, athletes, anyone looking to really master their emotions and perhaps look at how their emotions are getting in the way of what's most important to them. I mean, you will know, even Warren Buffett said, if you can't manage your emotions, you can't manage your money, right? And so there's so many variations of that truth. So that's a little bit about what I do. I work with everyone from all walks of life, but certainly a lot in the investing in self space and creating change.
Sure. And I think that like a lot of what you do is probably not too dissimilar to what I do. It's just that I guess if it was a spectrum where we have psychological and then material, perhaps over here, my core belief, wealth begins in the mind, just means that somewhere along that spectrum, you have to translate something internal into an external outworking. And I love what you're saying around, I guess this makes sense that you came from the gym, right? Because you were working with people trying to basically do the same thing in the physical, but then you also probably traced it back to something that really has to happen first in the mental. And I think that's interesting because like I see that often with people who will use goals or even a strategy sometimes as a cheap substitute or a proxy for actual action. And often just having a goal and saying that they want it sometimes takes the place of actually doing what it takes to achieve it. No one wants to do the work associated with getting the thing that they now say they want.
So I want to make sure I understand that example, Darcy, because I think that's an interesting point. Are you sort of saying, whether it's we say we want something or perhaps we do all the mental rehearsal, but there's not the action there? That's just an interesting point you bring up. Is that sort of
yeah, so typically I'll see so I see that typically when it comes to, we say I'm talking to a couple and they want to achieve financial freedom at a certain age. And doing all the work, we determine that, okay, you need this pot of money and you need to repay this amount of debt and make sure the kids are sorted out, which means that it's going to translate into X amount per month that you need to put somewhere. And in order to do that, you actually need to save that from your budget. That's basically where the rubber hits the road because it requires a change in their spending behavior. And it's that pathway that we often hit. And that's like, oh, so I actually have to do that when no one's watching and I can't really take any shortcuts. That's the part where I get fascinated by, right? Because
and actions speak louder than words, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yes. And just quickly to your point, I see that reference you were making. I mean, that's exactly the same as, the health and fitness side of things, right? And look, one of the things we'll get into is understanding your values and really honoring who you are. So I'm certainly not here and don't propose judging yourself per se. And, we'll get into that if perhaps you aren't taking action on what you say is important. And that's something we'll get into, is what you say is important actually what is important to you. But, again, there's many people who are happy to have the meeting with you, whether it's they have the best intentions or they get stuck in inaction. In the same way, there's many people who, I like to think that I would, when I owned the gym, that I would get great results with many clients, but I also had a number of clients who would just be happy to pay their membership, their subscription each week. And they wouldn't achieve the initial goals they set out with. And, again, some people were sort of limited by those blocks, but other people, they were comfortable with that. And so I think making those distinctions, getting real with yourself, and like I said, uncovering what those beliefs or patterns are, is really the name of the game.
Okay. What is that common denominator then, or what is the thing that people are in touch with that increases the odds that their goals and their actions are in alignment?
Great, perfect. The brilliant place to start, and frankly, absolutely where we need to start, is understanding human value systems. Okay, so the first thing is I'll define here just quickly what I'm not talking about. So what I'm not talking about is perhaps what some people may call core values. Trust, love, integrity, honesty. The example or the joke, Darcy, that I give to my clients is, I've never met anyone who gets out of bed in the morning and goes, yes, I can't wait to be honest today. Who can I be honest to? I don't get on this call and go, I'm so inspired to show Darcy integrity. Integrity perhaps is implied within my value structure of helping others and problem solving. That's certainly implied, but that's not why I do what I do. And again, I've worked with over 1,000 clients. I've never found anyone who their life was being driven first and foremost by these sort of buzzwords that often society tells us are the most important things in our life, or can be: trust, love, integrity. So what I am referring to is what is most valuable in your life. What are the priorities, that you live by? Whether that's perhaps, hopefully, some of your clients are wealth building, and that's what we can get into today, wealth building or financial freedom. That could be a value or a priority. We could be, for me, perhaps just to give an example, I love case studies. My first highest value is problem solving and serving clients. My second highest value is family. Third is financial freedom. And fourth is my health and well-being, okay? And so as an example, the reason that values are so absolutely crucial, and to your point, being clear on those values and being aligned, being congruent, is because if I'm setting a goal or putting an expectation on myself that isn't truly aligned with my values, the probability or likelihood of me achieving it is essentially next to none, because we all prioritize our actions through our value system. Now, many of your audience perhaps might say, well, I don't know my values. That sounds great, but, what are they? So, one thing that's important to mention, and we'll get to very shortly how you determine your values, Darcy, but our actions over time consistently, if you look deep enough, are always revealing our values. And so, when I'm working with clients, one of the first things that I'm doing, again, whether it's, self-sabotage, self-worth, relationship challenges, anxiety, depression, the very first thing I do with every client is spend a good 90 minutes getting absolutely clear on their values and truly what's most important in their life, because that is the absolute framework and essentially roadmap of setting clear expectations for yourself, understanding the real nuances and specifics of what drives you, and essentially making sure you're not bullshitting yourself or bullshitting others. One quick example, which we'll obviously cover more, Darcy, is many people are happy to say, oh, I've got a value on wealth building, but actual fact, they perhaps have a value on spending or technology, and so there is a difference, right, between perhaps building wealth and investing in assets versus, wanting finances to spend on the latest technology or a car, for example. Those are actually distinctly different values, and making those distinctions with yourself is absolutely crucial to understand why you do what you do, how you prioritize certain areas and how you procrastinate other areas, and then ultimately being real with yourself so that you can actually either create change or set goals that are truly honoring who you are, not living in this fantasy land of, I'm going to achieve X goal without having a value that matches it or is aligned with it.
That's really interesting, because you're giving words to a lot of things that I probably wondered about, or I probably expressed myself but in different ways, and I like your way better. It makes more sense. But I'm going to stay true to myself, right? Put it into practice.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's like this internal compass, and then there's this external reality. And if there's incongruency or non-alignment, things are out of kilter, you're butting up against yourself. You're creating all this tension and turmoil as you're trying to tell yourself one thing that your internal self is raging against or is not pointed in that same direction. So that we're talking about the values, I'll often refer to that maybe closer towards purpose, but I guess it's a continuum as well, right? And so for me, like, I would see this come out typically when people are asking for financial advice and they're clearly asking me help around how to optimize their strategy so that they could reach their financial objectives.
Yes.
But at the same time, the reason why they want to optimize their financial objective is because they have a lifestyle objective that's actually probably more important to them. For example,
Sure.
I want to be able to help my kid into their first home. Okay, so we're going to have to make some sacrifices then in how you do things today. There's a little bit of conflict, right? Like, that is sometimes the pathway to achieve what's important to you. But in the act of achieving it, it can be soul destroying if it's not, I guess, synced up. So to me, it sounds still a little bit theoretical at this stage. How could there actually be a shift where the actions that one engages in is more aligned to their values?
So I think, the first thing that I would start with is just the reality that we all have, inner conflicts is what I call them. And that's where, again, we say one thing which is true in one setting and we're consistent in one setting, but perhaps not true in the other. So as much as, to your point, I would say it's wise to sort of synthesize or perhaps some forms of psychology would use the word integrate those. I think that is a really wise and meaningful goal. I would say that I don't think it's realistic to not have any conflicts, so to speak. But certainly when I'm working with clients, again, whether it's on, wealth building, behavior change, depression, etc., it's about bringing the unconscious conscious. The famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung, he has a fantastic quote, which he says, "Until you bring the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And what that basically means is, we're all deeply influenced by these, hidden motivations, hidden agendas, but we're all influenced by these deep and often hidden aspects of our mind. And so until we bring those to awareness, bring those into consciousness, these dynamics, beliefs, and so on can really influence our behavior. And like I said, in one case, we say one thing, we do another. Or, perhaps in your domain, in your field, perhaps in one area we're investing and we're saving, but in another area we're more than willing to spend or we're impulsive. But the first thing is really going to be getting clear on your values. And so I'll segue, if you're comfortable, straight into how your audience can do that. Because in becoming absolutely clear on your values, and I think in many regards what your values are not, you can start to actually see those conflicts and start to make the change. Because look, again, all of us are influenced by pain, trauma. These are actually survival instincts that at times can take us off track, even though there is a sort of survival instinct or a best intention there. If we're not conscious of it, we can't make that change. Albert Einstein said if he was given 48 hours to solve the world's greatest problems, the first 47 hours would in fact be spent on understanding what actually is the problem. So I don't think it's fair to say our values are the problem, but perhaps lack of awareness to precisely what we value.
So what we're talking about here is we're talking about, are we talking about an absence of values themselves, or just a lack of understanding or a void of understanding of what those values already are that we have? Because we probably all already do have values, but we kind of don't know that we have them sometimes.
Look, great question. So look, the great news is we all have a set of values that we're living by right now, whether we know it or not. I'll just quickly say that when I'm working with my clients, Darcy, I use the word values and priorities interchangeably. Okay, because again, sometimes I feel that the word values has been quite overdone, particularly in organizations, right? I do a lot of corporate work and with executives, and every now and then, you have the company values, integrity, trust. What the hell does that mean, right? And also, how does it relate to the individual's values? So I like to use the word values and priorities interchangeably, because I think priorities that give you your sense of purpose and drive, that which is most valuable in your life, can sometimes be a bit more cut through. So we're talking about what are the highest priorities in your life. So we all have them, again, regardless of our age, sex, gender, etc. We all are living by these values, and again, our life demonstrates them. Now, how we get clear on our values, fortunately, isn't too complicated. That said, it is in many regards an art form. Here's where I would start. So again, if we're thinking about the concept that our fact that our values our actions, Darcy, demonstrate our values, whether we know it or not. Sometimes it's just breaking down what do our actions represent, if our actions perhaps are a bit symbolic or conflicting or abstract at times. So when I'm starting with my clients, like I said, there's a number of things that I do, but the first thing is getting them absolutely clear on their values and priorities, because that is the framework to filter out a lot and to get clear on actually a roadmap to congruency and achievement. The questions that I use, and I do use 12 questions specifically, But for the purpose of time, I really want to make sure that the audience today has got a couple they can really think about. So what we'll do is I will go through the questions now, Darcy, some of those, and then perhaps we could almost look at those perhaps with you as a bit of a case study to really make sure that the audience can actually go away.
I got a free session out of this. This is awesome. Thank you.
So the first one I would suggest is what gives you the most energy? Okay, so what are the top 3 things that give you the most energy? So, for example, if I use myself as an example, perhaps some of your audience might relate to this. Many of my clients look at me strangely, but I absolutely love, seeing my investing account going up, even seeing my automatic payments go out to my various accounts. And budgeting. So that gives me a lot of energy, strangely. So that clearly represents that something in the area of finance or wealth building has some intrinsic purpose, meaning value to me. Another thing that would give me energy is working with clients and problem solving. And the third would be spending time with my daughter. So first question is that I'd get your audience to consider is top 3 things that give them the most energy. Question 2 would be top 3 things that you love to learn about most. Okay. Again, this doesn't have to be formal study. This can be, YouTube videos, talking to a friend. What is it you love to learn about the most? Third would be most consistent long-term goals. Okay. So what have been the most consistent goals that you have been consistently working towards across your life? What are those goals? What do they represent? The fourth question would be, where are you most organized and ordered? Often clients, males in particular, for what it's worth, will look at me and they'll say in shock or tear. I say, Hayden, I'm not organized anywhere, God. But in actual fact, if you look in the right areas, you will see that the areas that have more intrinsic meaning and purpose to you, you naturally have more order and organization. Okay. Perhaps an example of that would be if you ask my fiance if I was organized, if she looked around the house, she'd probably go, Hayden's not organized at all. But perhaps if she came to my office, she'd see that every client's got a file. My calendar's very organized. Number of things regarding my business. Clearly, I'm organized there. So it demonstrates that's important to me. I also have a number of health supplements in my cabinet behind the monitor, right? So if my health wasn't important to me, that would not be backed up by my actions. And the fifth question that I'll give now before we go through would be, what do you love to talk about most? Now, this isn't to be confused with what do you talk about most, Darcy. It's what do you absolutely love to talk about most. So, for example, if I was at a family function, and perhaps they're saying, oh, Hayden, how are you? Or some sort of small talk. I'm probably not going to be too broad into that conversation in my values hierarchy. But if someone said to me, at a family function, Hayden, how's your business going? Or even better, if someone came up to me and they said, Hayden, I'm really trying to quit the alcohol, or I'm working on my anxiety, but I just can't get to the bottom of why do you think that is? Well, as I alluded to before, with my highest value of problem solving and serving others, you would really naturally see me come alive there because I love to talk about that. Again, all of these values are reflected in my actions if you look deep enough. So those are the 5 questions there. Why don't we actually run you through a couple of those, Darcy, as a bit of a case study, if you're comfortable?
Okay. So just to recap, that's energy, learning, consistent long-term goals. What are you most organized and ordered in? And then what do you love to talk about? Is that right?
Correct. Yep.
Cool.
Beautiful.
So the first one, energy. I can definitely come up with one really easy off the top of my head. So what gives me the most energy is creative problem solving. Whether it's my own or somebody else's, which requires a deep understanding of what the actual problem is. And then often just a high level connecting up of the dots. It seems like I can kind of see that faster maybe than some. And I would actually trace it all the way back to a school teacher I had when I was in primary school that taught us a methodology. I think we were probably like 8 years old when we were taught this. Wow. Taught us a methodology of actually brainstorming, evaluating, and then choosing the best answer for it. And that's always stayed with me. And so the more creative I get, the more I catch problems. Yeah.
Yeah, and just for what it's worth, a little insight perhaps for the audience there is, obviously I've alluded to today a number of times that, problem solving and clearly connecting the dots is very meaningful to me. I mean, it's literally what I do for work, right? That troubleshooting and problem solving in the mind. And so, just an interesting tidbit there that hopefully the audience might perceive that you and I've got good rapport, we get on well. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think those who share similar values, even though perhaps we do that problem solving, connecting the dots clearly in different ways, it'd be very unwise and frankly illegal for me to give financial advice, but that comes out right in each of ours in each of ours language, right? And so I think that might just be also another interesting reflection that it is unwise to expect someone to have the same value structure as you. We can get into that later with, your partner, your wife. How do you get them on board perhaps with your goals or your, finances? How do you change their behavior? That's another whole conversation. But in terms of rapport and fulfillment, it's wise to look at how you can fulfill and express your values. And in a relationship sense, if you have individuals with similar values, that's going to be more meaningful to you. So we won't go down that rabbit hole too much yet, but just the interesting overlap there, perhaps between our value structures and how that engages us both. So, ideally, we look at the top 3 answers for each. Now, I don't think, for the purpose of time, I don't think it's probably appropriate to go through all of them. But just to really illustrate that point, Darcy, let's go through the top 3 answers for that if we can. So you've given the first one, which is what gives you, that real problem solving, connecting the dots. Do you think you'd give me a couple more?
Yeah, definitely business. And the business that I would suggest would be business activity that I could engage in, which actually unlocks wealth that didn't exist before. In other words, I love the idea of working on my business in a way which doesn't rent seek or clip the ticket without adding an amount of value which exceeds the financial benefit that I get, because then I know I'm effectively mining something, right? So looking at business processes from the point of view of like a really pragmatic point of view, without faffing around, does that actually produce an output which is greater than the inputs? If the answer is yes, that gives me energy to pursue it.
Excellent.
And I think just having also what gives me energy is seeing the relationship between the micro and the macro. In other words, this could be in my own life or in the lives of other people as well. Some of the dynamics that are happening in their own world and understanding some of the linkages between the aggregate dynamics that are happening in the macro world. And then I find that interesting, lens shifting, where you're kind of moving this dial where you're connecting the two things so that there's alignment in people's lives and the environment that they're living in. That gives me energy. I guess it's probably connected to that efficiency piece as well, knowing that there's going to be a good output if you can orientate yourself to almost like the path of least resistance, but the path of greatest energy as well. Those would be the top 3 that I can think of.
Love it. Let's do let's do one more. So let's look at let's look at most consistent long-term goals, Darcy, across your life.
Sure. This is probably a little bit more nuanced because there would be a broader category of building wealth in my own life, plus building wealth in the lives of others that I don't offend. Is probably the best way of saying it, because I don't gel with everybody, I'm sure. But for those that I do gel with, because I know that I'm not offending them, it's kind of like I just want to give them everything. Like, hey, if it's a way that I could help you without getting into trouble, because it's not financial advice, of course, then I'm going to help you because it's building wealth in your life. And if I'm building wealth in your life, then I'm empowering another decentralized branch of probably what I represent, but in a different way in somebody else. So my connection to my own wealth and how I invest is me doing that in my life. But when I'm talking to other people, that's also, I kind of own that in a sense. It's not that I'm getting remunerated in that way necessarily. Often it's got nothing to do with my own account balance, but it kind of sits at another level, I guess you could say, of wealth building.
So one thing I'll just point out there for the audience, and you touched on it, is a lot of synergy, right, between those 3 values. Depending on your self-awareness to it, you could put those all in the same category, or you could make subtle distinctions. And I think, again, as I was saying earlier, that's sort of where the real art form is, in a sense, on really truly knowing yourself and making some of those distinctions. But, like I said, I'm not expecting the audience to absolutely nail that. I think that would be unrealistic. That would be like listening to your podcast and them expecting themselves to be a financial advisor. However, certainly asking these 5 questions, I would suggest really spending good 30 minutes on it, if not more. Asking those 5 questions, doing the top 3 to 4 answers for each, and looking at what are the most consistent themes coming up. After doing that, separating those out into those categories, likely sort of 3 to 4 categories, generally speaking, although I don't want to put a limitation on that. And then from there, really trying to actually look at what does this actually represent to you, okay? Because it's not the word, but the meaning that you associate with the word, okay? Right. And in doing that, we can start to become clear again on what these values are, what they mean to us. And to our earlier point in the conversation, Darcy, start to understand why we do the things that we do, for better or worse.
So I guess going back to something that you said, you do a bit of work with, say, corporates, where there's a lot of talk about values as an organization, but obviously that organization is made up of a lot of different subtypes of different personalities with completely different value sets often. And there's kind of like this overlay of, say, diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, that get jammed down their throat. That they kind of get it, and they probably do think, hey, these are really good things, but the way that it's being expressed at the corporate level certainly doesn't jive with who I am as an individual. Yes. So do you see a lot of, I guess, internal conflict that happens within organizations because people are in conflict with a superimposed value set?
Very good question. So to answer that question, I need to give a principle first, Darcy, which is that no one goes to work. They go to work to get their values met. Okay? At the minimum, we would say, financial security, etc., right? But, you'll always find that, again, if you look at that question, what is your buy-in to your work? Regardless of the industry, job description, etc., there'll always often be something profound behind that. And I'll just quickly jump back to what we were saying before, because you've made something you brought something up very important. Again, when you're doing these 5 questions that I've laid out, it's really wise to not just look again at, I know I touched on the word, but the meaning of the word. So, for example, let's say that someone said, I'm organized at work, right? And they write work down for one of those 3 answers. Well, it would be wise to consider, what does your work mean to you, or why are you organized in your work? So, for example, one individual could be organized in their work because it's a pathway for personal development. I mean, I work with I'm working with one client last year who hated his job, but he got paid $900,000 a year, and so that's his buy-in to his role, right? For me, like I said, I mean, as much as, wealth building, finances, higher my values, I absolutely love the problem solving and seeing clients really achieve meaningful, lasting change. And so that's the buy-in for me. And you've touched on some of your drivers before. So I'll answer that question, but again, just illustrating that no one goes to work. They go to work to get their values met. So building on that principle, Darcy, this is really where the art of communication comes into it, where if someone can't connect the dots on how what their employer is expecting of them or asking of them, then they're not going to create that internal buy-in. In the same way that if I can't see the value of building wealth in my own life, then why the hell would I do it, right? So we have to have deep meaning associated by it. And in many regards, it is much harder to connect those dots in the workplace or for organizations to get their team behind things, because as much as we like to, it's very easy to say, they should be invested and I pay them well and for X reason they should be brought in. But we're forgetting the principle that we've just gone through today, which is everyone lives by a unique set of values. These set of values influence where they're most organized, most ordered, where they get energy. They influence where they're most self-governed and where they're most disciplined. In many regards, I know many clients that are mothers, and they are unbelievably ordered, organized with their children's education, etc. But perhaps, if they've got a part-time job, they might be certainly less orderly there. So it's not the work, it's what the work represents. And I think your question specifically was, what are the challenges, or what's that sort of congruency or incongruency as it relates to organizations and getting the team brought into their values? It's really going to be the helping the individuals in the team connect the dots on how what's most important to the individual is actually relevant to the company's mission. And I do a bit of work with that with corporates, again, of, really the way to do it. The organization needs to really have a compelling mission or purpose, not some generic thing that's vague, actually something clear. And then the individuals need to connect the dots on how what they're dedicated to, their values, can actually be fulfilled through the companies. Again, whether that's wealth building, whether it's personal development opportunities, whether it's relationships in the team, we actually need to connect those dots. Which, before I throw it back to you, to the point of, diversity, inclusion, etc. I've got a lot of thoughts on that, but again, a big challenge with that is that these are just these idealisms that essentially organizations and individuals are projecting on everyone else, expecting them to have that same buy-in to it, without actually associating meaning and purpose with it. They would be wise to perhaps help the team or the employees understand how that can benefit the culture, how that can benefit them in terms of the relationships, perhaps more opportunities for growth, etc. If they're not communicating that and the individuals can't see how what's important to the organization benefits them, there's going to be incongruency, and you're never going to get the best out of your people, or you're never going to get the best out of yourself.
No, well said. And I guess to a certain extent that can be manufactured, and that's probably what those in that industry would be busy doing, is exactly what you just said there. But it's for a higher purpose to push those things through. Yes. I want to go back though to the surplus awareness of what the value set is or the priorities are versus the absence of it. Because when I think about this in my own life, and certainly when I ask the question of other people, which is, where does your desire for wealth come from? Yes. Often I'm forced to consider my own life as well, where I grew up in a place of lack, where there was a void of wealth. Yep. And I guess my circumstances were in conflict with what was important to me. And so in a sense, that void or that lack of created a really deep desire, almost like a gravitational pull towards driving towards it than anything else. And I think if that wasn't important to my value set, that environment that I was placed in wouldn't have triggered me in that way. So I guess this is a bit of like a nature versus nurture question.
Sure.
But how important is that DNA in someone versus that desire, or where does that desire actually get triggered? Is that what I'm asking? I think that's what I'm asking.
No, look. That's a brilliant question, and for what it's worth, this is another crucial principle, and actually overlays very well with those 5 questions that I gave to, almost dare I say it, sort of fact check the values they're coming up with. So the principle is, Darcy, and I know we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago briefly on the phone, is that all values come from voids. Now, consider a void the perception of lack, or the perception that something is missing, okay? So it certainly does not surprise me at all what you've just described there around not having, I don't think you said not having those opportunities, but, I mean, what would, give me a bit more context for that, Darcy. You sort of alluded to not having the resources, the freedom you would have loved growing up. Could you give me a bit more context towards that?
Yeah, exactly that. Just not having either the financial resources or whatever else was that I wanted to do, the freedom to be able to do it, the access to opportunities, the outworking of my ambition. There was a lack of being able to engage with that due to resource restriction. And so that created in me a desire to solve that restriction problem so that I could achieve what was important to me.
Yeah, brilliant. Great example for the audience. So the principle, as I was saying, Darcy, is that voids translate to values. And essentially what that means is the things that we perceive as most missing in our life, most unfulfilled, become the things that are the most important, become our highest priorities. And again, this is in conflict with what many people think about perhaps how they run their life or what's important to them. People think, integrity is my value, and I choose that, and that's why I do what I do. Well, again, integrity may be a subset of your values. For example, for both of us, clearly our business and our problem solving, serving clients is extremely important, and so it's just implied that the integrity comes within that. So what actually influences who we are, what's most important, and literally what our whole identity revolves around are the voids in our life. And this is both conscious or unconscious, okay? So, perhaps there may not have been a clear moment, Darcy, when you were, that original age where you had that insight. You may not have thought to myself, oh my God, I'm going to need to create wealth to change my circumstance. It may have just been an unconscious awareness that became more apparent over time, to where, you have this pain point, again, you have this void, and the void creates context and contrast for why fulfilling that would be most meaningful. And I think in your case, tell me if I'm wrong, again, the context and contrast principle that I teach is very important, because there would have been likely a void that, perhaps you see your friends and they've got this car, or they've got this bike or scooter or whatever's important to you, or they could go and do these family trips. And there's this void and often pain point that is missing for you in your life, and that, again, that would be meaningful to fulfill. And so it is truly voids that create these values or priorities in our life. As I was saying earlier, I work with clients from all walks of life, but I have had a number, fortunately, of very wealthy and sort of high caliber individuals. And all of the clients that I've worked with it's amazing, really, that are worth, multi-millions, it is almost always the sort of story or perception that you've said, where there is the perception of a void or something missing. And that's true for any of our values, right? Whether it's wealth building, whether it's, probably much of your audience is very big on their own growth, development. For that to be a priority in their life, there would be a perception, not necessarily of pain, but at least of a lack of understanding, or that they know they can do better. For me, arguably I'm, seeing 24 clients a week, problem solving, working on a wide variety of issues. But I know that I can always do better, and I know I can always be that 10% more efficient, perhaps like you. And so it's that perception, conscious of or unconscious, that there's a void that is yet to be filled, that creates the buy-in to the values and ultimately a rewarding, fulfilling journey in the pursuit of that.
And I'm going to break that down and completely butcher this.
There's a lot in that.
Yeah, no, but it makes a lot of sense. Like you're not going to have a massive meal unless you're hungry first. And right. So you create this vacuum, which then sucks in the nourishment. So what you said there was what's missing effectively becomes the highest priority, which means that, and you kind of confirm this just by saying that maybe the wealthiest clients that you work with will often exhibit the same sort of story, right? The genesis story of their wealth creation probably came from lack as well, or some sort of void. But what I'm also hearing is that that's incredibly encouraging to anybody who finds themselves in a quote unquote disadvantaged situation, because once you remove all the social and cultural garbage that sometimes gets overlaid on top of these social disadvantages, you realize that that is actually what we used to refer to as the school of hard knocks. And no disrespect to those who are suffering from genuine trauma. I'm just talking about generalized pain and lack and difficult circumstances that most people will have to some degree. That's actually the prerequisite, isn't it, for
100%
degree of lasting change, right?
Yes, look, it is the prerequisite, and there's so many examples of that perhaps yourself, the audience, can connect the dots with. I mean, if we think about the fact that people who win lotto tend to spend and lose the money, right? So they haven't had an inherent value or corresponding void that's given them that purpose behind it. So they whether it's their inheritance or lotto, that's not going to be reflected in their actions, because they don't have that real catalyst that creates the buy-in purpose behind the wealth building. Okay, so you're very right with that. And look, it is very very meaningful, very therapeutic, frankly, to connect the dots on how the things in your life that you've perceived as most missing actually really purposefully, very meaningfully translate over to the things in your life and the real meaningful pursuits that you're on. I mean, I work with a wide variety of clients with a wide variety of value systems and priorities, right? Whether it's, professional athlete, sport, or business, finance, personal growth, or being the best mother or father you can be. But again, that void, conscious or unconscious, those parts of ourselves that we've perceived as missing and often judged in ourselves, that is truly the catalyst for, again, creating that context and contrast behind why it would be so meaningful, so purposeful to fulfill that. The last thing I'll just quickly add to that, there is an important difference between a void and, pain and or trauma. The void doesn't per se have to have trauma pain around it, but in reality, it often does, right? When I you would know this, and again, when I speak about clients who have built wealth or are on that journey, yes, there's the void, but often there is oftentimes very unbearable pain around that. I've worked with many clients who, maybe their parents abandoned them, or they were, their parents were addicted to drugs, etc. And so there is the void there that gives them that real purpose to build wealth or create freedom in their life. But equally, there can be a lot of pain and trauma around that as well, which can often manifest in other ways, which we'll get into how I overcome that with clients. But to answer your question, I was just going to say, understanding that in fact, in that pain, there's actually been purpose that has actually influenced you deeply in terms of what's most meaningful to you is a very profound distinction for people going through pain or have had hardship in their life, how that's influenced their value structure.
Yeah, and I think it's no coincidence that probably the greatest faith on earth kind of connects a purpose to pain, which really lines up people's trajectory quite well, because they now know that there is some sort of meaning behind my suffering, which is kind of goes beyond just myself, like it's actually good for other people that I'm going through this. And I think that's ultimately what makes us a pretty good citizen of this planet, right? When we're actually taking that rubbish that's been done in our life and we turn it into something good. And it kind of ties into what you're saying before, that sometimes our actions will give us a clue as to what's going on. Like the fruit will identify the tree, and whether we believe that we're a fig or a lemon, it's often because of our actions, right? That testify to what's probably going on the inside. But I want to kind of tie a bow in this part of the conversation and talk a little bit about some things like self-limiting beliefs and self-sabotage, because let's say you start from this void, this lack, and you go through some sort of mental transformation, which helps to get your actions more in line with your values and your purpose and all that sort of stuff. But let's say as time goes on, you notice some destructive behaviors. There's some rot in the leaves, or the fruit isn't quite right. You're doing the right functions, but there's something not quite right going on here. And self-sabotage in particular, like I've seen this a lot with people who I would probably put in the category of high performance in terms of business or wealth. There's often a weakness that rises up and gets the better of them. Where does that come from?
What a question. Where we need to start with that, Darcy, is that, and I alluded to this earlier in the conversation, is that we're all, again, deeply influenced by these hidden parts of our mind. And predominantly, in many cases, what is responsible for these patterns, again, whether we call it self-sabotage, limiting beliefs, etc., is actually these deeply ingrained survival instincts, okay? So, for example, let's say that I had a number of experiences in college where I perceived that something was important to me, and I really tried, and perhaps I had this perception that I failed. These past experiences actually get stored in our subconscious mind, and they basically, it's almost like, where you take a screenshot on your iPhone, right? You take the screenshot and it saves it to the memory bank. This is very much happening to us, every moment of the day, via these survival, primitive instincts. Essentially, Darcy, trying to help us seek out what is pleasureful and avoid what is painful. And so, clients will very often come to me with, we need to get clear on their values and make sure we're congruent there. But really the second thing I do, and this is really the bulk of the work that I do with clients, again, regardless of who they are, if they're an executive or a tradesman, etc., is going to be understanding what's the correlation between their present day challenges, whether that's self-sabotage, anxiety. For many people, Darcy, it's actually, and you'd see this, right? It's actually just people giving themselves permission to do what they'd love. It is the past experiences and our perceptions and how we've stored these memories that are very much influencing our behavior that we often don't recognize in an attempt to help us avoid pain.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot to unpack.
It probably goes beyond the scope of today's session. So what we'll do is we'll finish up on that, because we've covered a ton of ground. Groundwork is what I kind of see this, and I think there's more to this conversation. So what we'll do is we'll have another session, and we'll start maybe around that, like past successes or mistakes, and how that potentially augments this a little bit. Because in particular, I really want to tap into those that are investing because they can, not because they need to. Like for me personally, I feel like I need to. It's an outworking of something that's deep inside of me. But at the same time, I acknowledge that there's a lot of people that derive pleasure from investing from other reasons, which are equally as valid. And I want to understand that. And I think, I suspect that the past kind of can really influence that discussion. So before we finish up, Hayden, what you're doing is really important. And I think access to the type of work that you do shouldn't be restricted. And I know you're a finite one person, so it's first come, first serve, right? I know there'll be a lot of people that probably want to connect with you and maybe work with you more directly. So what's the best place for people to reach out to you?
So nice and simple, the best way for people to reach out would frankly be having a look on my website, which is haydenbrown.co.nz. There's a wealth of information there, articles, interviews, and also a bit more about my approach. And ultimately, if someone did think they could benefit from that, we would just have a conversation and look at the alignment from there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for having this discussion with me, Hayden. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks, Darcy.
Thanks for listening into the NZ Everyday Investor Podcast, a show that's about helping you, the everyday Kiwi, build wealth. To learn more about the show, please visit nzeverydayinvestor.com or visit your show notes on your podcast player. There, you can find out how to make contact, sign up to our free newsletter, and check out previous episodes. The mission of the NZ Everyday Investor is to help increase wealth for the everyday Kiwi. If you'd like to support this effort, then there's a few things you can do. Write a review, comment on social media, or support the show on Patreon and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Before we finish up, just another reminder that what was discussed today is for educational purposes only. Ideally, before acting on anything covered here, please contact your trusted financial advisor and do your own research. Catch you next time.